All right, hello everybody, and welcome to your Unit 5 webcast on Foucault. So for this, I'm going to be focusing on your Foucault paper. And as a reminder, for those of you who want to get extra credit, remember you have that option that's offered through the SST Writing Mentorship Program. If you write your paper, submit them a draft, schedule an appointment with them, and then provide me an email of the comments that they gave you as well as your rough draft. In addition to uploading your final paper, you can get up to 4 points. A few of you who took part in this last time forgot to send me the draft of your paper in addition to their comments. And so what I can't tell with that is what kind of improvement you've made. So I don't know where you started or how you integrated their comments. So in order to get points, extra credit points for this, you need to include your draft, your feedback from them, and your final paper. So again, the goal for this class is not just to teach you about theory, it's to help you become better writers. And so hopefully you can use the feedback that I provide for you, you can use some of the resources that are provided for you, and any feedback that you get from the Writing Mentorship Program to not only be better for your professional careers, but possibly grad school and things of that nature. This means that things like spelling, avoiding contractions, which are things like don't, shouldn't, wouldn't, couldn't, and instead spelling them out, having clear organization in your paper and things like that are all beneficial to help you be a more formal academic writer. And again, the purpose of these papers and the ways in which we use them for this class is about evidence-based writing. Okay, so this is not just about your opinion, it's not just about reciting what you know, it's about using evidence to support an argument. And so this is an important skill to learn, so you want to be sure that you are recognizing how to utilize evidence, and that's the course material that you've provided to support your argument. If you're unclear about that, please contact me and we can talk about it more. Okay, so before you start on your Foucault paper, I want to be sure, as I reminded you in your last podcast, that I strongly encourage you to first look over Dr. Jarek's PowerPoint and read the Serap article before you try to go into the original pieces of Foucault. Foucault can be pretty rough to get through. He's a very dense theoretical thinker, and so it will be better for you to look at the PowerPoint as well as the Serap article to give you some foundation and lay a little bit of the groundwork of Foucault. This will also help if you review the prompt first for the writing assignment and then read, because then you'll know sort of how to find those pieces that will answer whichever prompt it is that you're choosing. Yeah, so again, Foucault's a little rough. I'm sorry, he just is, but he's one of those thinkers that are very important for us as we're thinking about justice and justice-related issues. So I've provided these additional materials for you in order to sort of familiarize yourself first before you get into the actual text. All right, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty of your papers. Okay, first, the prompt one. So here's what the prompt says. It says, what is Foucault's view of history? How does he propose to study history and for what purpose? Give an example of his approach to historical analysis, either his study of punishment or sexuality or mental illness. And lastly, how does his view of history compare and contrast with that of Marx? All right, so let's start with part A. It's looking at Foucault's view of history. So one important thing that you want to recognize is that Foucault believes that history is nonlinear. He doesn't believe that we are moving and advancing in history. He doesn't know if there's a pattern of history. So those are just a few of the things that he talks about, so you want to make sure that you know what his view of history is. Part B looks at the method of study. So Foucault, unlike some other theorists, is using genealogy. You need to be able to explain what that is. What is this genealogy? How does he study punishment in terms of genealogy? So the parts that you read are the parts on punishment, and he looks at how punishment has changed over the course of history, and he doesn't necessarily think that this is an evolutionary advance. In terms of genealogy, he is not just looking at chronological progress. He doesn't necessarily believe that progress is actually even happening. So you want to look at that. And he is looking at the discontinuities of history. So how things were done, and then there's a disjuncture, and then sometimes things change, and sometimes he uses the past to discredit the present. He thinks we're a product of our times, and that doing things and seeing things in a way that is different, but is not necessarily better than the past. Let's see. He's looking at how subjects are constituted and looking at how we construct man and woman in discourse. And he is looking at those silenced voices. These are just a few of the things that you could talk about, but again, you want to look at this genealogy. Part C is asking you to pick a topic. So remember, he's looking at 3 separate things. You can talk about punishment, you can talk about sexuality, or you can talk about mental illness. So punishment is addressed both in the original Foucault reading you did and also in the Sarup article. So you want to look at how he did a historical analysis of punishment. And so he is looking at the change from physical punishment of the body to punishment and control of the mind. So this is what he calls the carceral state. And so he's looking at why and how this happened. So we have changed. The ways in which we think about punishment has changed. So he's trying to track how this change has occurred. As we know, we have moved from sort of a bodily conception of history to a more mental conception of punishment. And so we want to look at that. You want to look at how surveillance of people has become more prevalent, right? So we have surveillance everywhere. We have webcams. We have surveillance in the workplace. We have tracking of everything that we do. So how does this surveillance and this mind control work in the eyes of Foucault? If you're looking at mental illness, Foucault, he himself went through analysis. And so he's looking at the past and the present and ways of treating mental health and defining what is mentally healthy and what then is mentally deviant. He's talking about during the Renaissance, the insane, they lived within the communities. They lived with everyone else. And then people decided that they needed to be treated, that there was some sort of pathology or they were pathological. And so they were moved and they were often shipped elsewhere or moved away elsewhere. And they were shut away from others. They were moved out of the community where they used to be part of the community. Which is really interesting because if you think about how we're looking at mental illness now, we are talking more about that community integration and putting them back within the community. So again, you want to see and think about this. The last one is sexuality. So this is highlighted in the Sarup article. His genealogy looks at the increasing development of the scientific study of sexuality. So what Foucault is arguing is that sexuality is not necessarily just a physically given innate drive of what is or is not erotic or what is attractive to people, but rather that those things, those ideas are actually socially created through history and defined so that some people and some parts of history, for example, like in the Roman era, homosexuality was viewed as a completely natural thing. It actually was for men, homosexual acts were part of the maturation process. At that same time, women often slept together when their men were off at war for long periods of time because they were considered still faithful to their men because they weren't sleeping with other men, but they were still able to engage in sexual acts with other people, other women. And so this was sort of a part of life, which now it's considered pathological. And so you want to be able to think about this. And again, look to Sarup for this because that article discusses this. All right, so the last part about this, part D, is looking at Marx and Foucault. So this is specifically covered in Dr. Jurek's PowerPoint. Here she talks about the ways, for example, that Foucault doesn't see a pattern in history the way that Marx did. And so that's one difference. You want to be able to know the other kinds of differences. So you want to be able to compare and contrast Foucault and Marx. All right, so that's prompt 1. Prompt 2 focuses on punishment. So as you'll notice in prompt 1, you have a choice. You can look at punishment, sexuality, or mental illness, whereas in prompt 2, you are only looking at punishment. Again, I can't encourage this enough. Look at the PowerPoint and the Sarup articles before you start this. They will help you get through Foucault's discussion of punishment. Part A of the question is focusing on punishment changes from punishment to the body to more mind control and surveillance. And so that is one thing you want to talk about. What is this shift and how did it happen? You need to explain historically how this happened. You can't just say that it happened, okay? So this is a really big part about providing that context and providing evidence. You can't just say that something happened. You need to provide sort of the background and the understanding as to why it happened. Part B is looking at the reasons for this. So look again at the PowerPoint about these factors. So Dr. Jurek provides these sort of factors that influenced why this change has occurred. For example, you can look at the notion of freeing of the serfs who were forced to move into the cities, and then you have the growth of the cities. So then punishment as spectacle doesn't work as well anymore. So that's one of the reasons. There are lots of other reasons. Then you're looking at what are some of the advantages of this change in punishment. So Foucault talks about some of these advantages as being efficiency and humanity. So remember, though, that even though Foucault does say that some of this shift is more efficient and more humane, he does not necessarily believe that the move from punishment as spectacle to surveillance is always going to be more humane or necessarily superior. It is not that he wants people to suddenly be physically punished again or have that spectacle of bodily punishment again, which is very interesting given the conversations about waterboarding that have occurred in the United States in recent history. But Foucault is concerned about how much of surveillance were happening, how much of this mind control, and then the adverse effects that this can happen. So what does this mean? It means that the surveillance model could mean that things like your cell phones and your phone calls are monitored, right? So if you think about how much we're monitored through Facebook, through advertisements, through social media, through everything. Amazon and other large companies spend big money and buy data sets, and they use algorithms to monitor essentially everything we do. So for example, you look at your newsfeed in Facebook and you have liked something and then suddenly your suggested pages change. Or I can remember when I put the announcement on that I was pregnant years ago, and suddenly every ad that popped up in my Facebook was about babies, maternity clothes and baby items and things like that, and I was totally being stalked by Facebook, and that happens all the time. So think about that. What is this monitoring doing? So look again at the PowerPoint and make sure that you're familiar with that, and look at how he talks about these kinds of surveillance and how it can be really problematic. So part E is asking you to contrast Foucault and Bentham. So remember Jeremy Bentham. One thing to start with is to look at the PowerPoint and look at the image of Bentham's panopticon. Right, so Foucault uses this as a metaphor for surveillance in modern society. And this is very important. He does not like the Bentham model. He hates it. So he thinks that this model of big brother and mind control, which often leads to control and power being used everywhere, he does not view this as a good thing. And so he talks about Bentham, but I don't want to read a bunch of papers that say that he uses Bentham as the pinnacle of what we should be doing, because that's not what it is. He does not like this image of the panopticon and this notion about how surveillance is becoming everywhere and all-encompassing. Again, it's looking at things. Facebook is another good example. So if you think about, there are entire jobs that people have right now that is to look at Facebook and to troll Facebook and to find out everything that they can find out about people. So you have companies doing this. You have people in HR departments checking out potential new hires. You have colleges and universities doing this. You have private investigators doing this. You essentially have to assume that anything about you that is on Facebook somewhere is fodder for a future employer. And so you want to be, what does that do then? What is this kind of surveillance? So part of this is that it's a limit on freedom of expression, right? Because we don't feel like we can express things because we feel like people are always watching. Foucault thinks that Bentham's discussion of prisons is a metaphor for this kind of surveillance. And so when you talk about comparing Foucault with Bentham, or when comparing Foucault with Marx, again, you need to make sure that you are providing that context, that background, in order to situate your argument. And so you can't just suddenly say that Foucault does not agree with Bentham without telling us what Bentham believes or what Bentham talks about. Same with when you're talking about Foucault and Marx. Okay, so let's see, last couple things. Remember to look at the resources you have for APA and to make sure to cite. So many of you struggled with APA citation, and you struggled with citing things when you're paraphrasing. So if you're talking about what Foucault has said, if you are not using a direct quote, you still have to cite him. Citing is about giving reference and proper credit to those people who you are talking about, to the ideas that you are taking. And so most things that you will be talking about in your paper are not considered common knowledge, therefore they should be cited and they should be attributed to where you got that information from. Again, your paper should not solely be reliant on my PowerPoint or on Dr. Jurek's PowerPoint. You need to incorporate these materials and these readings to show me that you can take the original reading and apply it to the arguments that you're making. So if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I wish you luck on your paper. I look forward to reading them, and good luck with Foucault, because again, he can be tough, but he has some really great things to say. All right, have a great day.